Imagine looking out your kitchen window, right? You're watching a summer rainstorm, and you suddenly realize that the water pouring down the glass is, well, it's actually the ultimate instruction manual for human economics, sociology, and like your own personal happiness.
Right, which sounds a bit out there at first.
Totally out there. But, welcome to the deep dive. Because we spend so much time hunting for the perfect self-help book or parsing ancient philosophy, expecting the answers to life's biggest questions to be written down in black and white.
We really do. We have this deep-seated bias toward the written word. I mean, we want a manual, a framework that someone else has already figured out and just, summarized for us.
Exactly. But the premise we are exploring today upends that entirely. We have this singular, honestly fascinating essay written by Shuifeng in December of 2024. It's titled The Value and Significance of Flow.
Yeah, and the core argument here is that the most profound truths about how to thrive aren't actually found in libraries. They're found in the physical mechanics of movement.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Weifeng makes a really radical claim right out of the gate. The author believes that observing the physical world, so watching a river or tracking a weather system, is infinitely more valuable than reading any traditional spiritual text.
Right, and the essay introduces this concept of the wordless heavenly book.
The wordless heavenly book. I love that phrasing.
It's great, right? It's the foundational framework for this whole piece. Weifeng argues that the universe itself, including all physical phenomena, is just this direct dialogue between humanity and what the text calls the greatest creator.
So in this view, a rainstorm or an ocean current isn't just like background meteorology.
No, not at all. It is a physical manifestation of a universal law.
Mhm.
And the very first lesson of this wordless book is the absolute necessity of flow.
It's a totally fractal view of reality, really. The text breaks down the blueprint of nature to show that flow is never just arbitrary background noise. It's the engine of existence.
Yeah, and it's driven by highly specific forces. I mean, oceans flow because of deep thermal currents, right? Rivers move because gravity pulls mass from high elevation down to low elevation.
Right, and clouds circulate because of the complex thermodynamics of heat and cold in the atmosphere.
Exactly. And if you strip away those forces, the gravity, the temperature differentials, the entire system just collapses.
Right.
Without that constant, restless movement of water and air, the Earth wouldn't just be quiet. It would be entirely sterile. I mean, flow is what distributes the resources necessary to sustain biology.
Which brings us to the author's incredibly vivid contrast here. We understand the mechanics of a flowing river, sure, but the text forces us to look closely at what happens when water stops moving.
Yeah, the stagnant pool.
Right. When water ceases to flow, it doesn't just sit there peacefully, it actively deteriorates, becomes this breeding ground for bacteria, viruses, and, foul odors.
If we look at that through the lens of physics, specifically thermodynamics, a stagnant pool is basically a closed system surrendering to entropy.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Without the input and output of energy that flow provides, the system inevitably degrades into disorder and rot. The lack of movement is the literal mechanism of disease. The water is dying.
It's a wild analogy. It's as if the author is telling you to put down the encyclopedia, look out your window, and realize the rainstorm holds more answers than a whole library.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But I do have to push back a little here, though. It's a great visual, obviously. But bridging the gap between a basic biology lesson about a stagnant pond and the overarching will of a greatest creator, that feels like a massive leap to me.
I can see that.
Like, how does the author justify taking a standard principle of environmental science and turning it into a philosophical absolute?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the author relies entirely on the logic of cause and effect to make that bridge.
Okay, how so?
If the wordless heavenly book is written by the creator, then the rules governing the physical world must be the exact same rules governing the human world.
So there are no separate categories.
Exactly. There is no separation between nature and human invention in this philosophy. If stagnation causes literal decay in a closed ecosystem like a pond, that identical physical law dictates that stagnation will cause metaphorical decay in human systems.
Oh, I see. So the physics of rot applies to literally everything we build.
Right. If a stagnant pond breeds disease, a stagnant human invention will breed its own kind of pathology.
And that takes us directly into how this physical law applies to our most ubiquitous invention, money.
Yeah, applying the fluid dynamics of a river to human economics is where this framework really shows its teeth, I think.
It really does. The essay argues that currency, much like water, only holds value when it is in motion.
Right. The text uses this great example of a single 100 yuan bill
Mm.
circulating through a community.
Yeah, the bill passes from Zhongshan to Lixi to Wangwu and finally to Zhaoliu. But let's elevate that a bit and look at the actual economic mechanism at play here, the velocity of money. The core argument is that wealth isn't determined by the static amount of money that exists, but by the speed and frequency with which it changes hands.
Absolutely. Yeah. Think about it. If a 100 yuan bill is spent at a local bakery, the baker then uses it to pay the flour supplier.
Right. And then the supplier pays the delivery driver.
Exactly. And the driver buys groceries. That single piece of paper, simply by flowing, has facilitated 4 distinct services. It met multiple human needs and created a whole web of tangible value.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of this in terms of kinetic versus potential energy.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right, because when that bill is locked in a bank vault or like folded up in a mattress, it is merely potential energy.
Yeah.
It has the capacity to facilitate exchange, but in its static state, it is doing absolutely nothing. The exact moment it enters the market and you spend it, it becomes kinetic energy.
And in that static state, according to Su Feng,
Yeah.
the bill holds absolute zero significance for society. It is just dead paper. Hoarding capital is the economic equivalent of damming a river. It creates an artificial drought downstream.
Wow, yeah. It perfectly mirrors the stagnant pool concept. A high-friction environment where money is hoarded rather than circulated creates actual economic decay.
Which forces you, as a listener, to really audit your own resources, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really makes you think, are you operating like a stagnant pool? Like, are you hoarding potential energy in your bank account or even in your unused skills or your network?
Right.
Or are you finding ways to let those resources flow outward to create kinetic value in your own community?
It is a deeply confronting question. Because if flow creates health in a biological ecosystem and wealth in a macroeconomic system, we have to look at what happens when we scale this mathematical principle to the actual structures of human geography.
Yeah, human society as a whole. If moving money creates economic wealth, does moving people create societal wealth?
And the author says, yes, absolutely. The text maps this physical law directly onto human institutions, entire nations, ethnic groups, businesses.
And the claim is that frequent flow of people is the fundamental prerequisite for civilization and prosperity.
It's important to note here just how far the author pushes this physical law.
Right, and let's just make a crucial distinction for our listeners here. The text explicitly argues that a nation must open its doors entirely.
Right.
But we have to be clear, we are neutrally reporting this viewpoint as the author's philosophical stance. We are not endorsing any open border policies or taking a political stance here.
Exactly. We are merely exploring the logical conclusion of this flow theory as it's presented in the text.
Right, so looking at it purely as fluid dynamics applied to human geography.
Yeah. In that view, a nation must open its doors. The essay explicitly states that a country should establish mechanisms to actively encourage its citizens to go abroad.
And aggressively welcome foreigners to enter.
Right. The completely free flow of human beings is presented not as like a policy preference, but as an absolute requirement to avoid becoming a geographic stagnant pool.
Because if a nation restricts the movement of its people, it traps its cultural and intellectual water.
And the text is incredibly specific about the symptoms of this societal stagnation. It doesn't just result in a sluggish economy.
No, it goes way deeper.
Restricted movement breeds interpersonal tension, conflict, and ultimately a regression into inflexibility and ignorance.
Without cross-pollination, a closed society calcifies. The bacteria grows, just like the pond.
Exactly. And Su Feng doesn't just leave this at the macro level of international borders either. They bring the theory all the way down to the micro level.
Right, the daily commute. They offer a very specific application for the workplace. The text uses the example of a company with 8 chain stores.
Yeah, the chain store scenario is a brilliant microcosm of the whole philosophy. The text advises that a company must physically rotate its employees across those 8 locations constantly.
So the staff at store A must flow to store B and B to C and so on.
All right.
On the surface, I mean, that sounds like an administrative nightmare.
Unquote nightmare for HR, yeah.
But if we dig into the psychology of the workplace, it actually makes perfect sense. Think about why human beings fester in static environments.
Well, when the exact same people work in the exact same hierarchy, in the exact same room for 5 years, You get profound habituation.
Yes. You develop institutional groupthink. Hierarchies completely calcify.
Resentments over minor slights build up because there is no new environmental input to break the dynamic loop.
Right. Someone leaves their mug in the sink and suddenly it's a blood feud.
Exactly. That we've always done it this way mentality is the very definition of organizational stagnation.
But by physically rotating the staff, you introduce fresh currents. It isn't just about changing the scenery, it's about breaking down the interpersonal bacteria that fester in closed loops.
The company forces neuroplasticity onto its workforce simply by changing the geographic seating chart.
The business remains vibrant solely through the physical movement of its people. It prevents the psychological decay that inevitably happens when human beings become entirely predictable to one another.
Which takes us to the most intimate application of this entire philosophy. You and me.
Yes. The text provides highly specific directives for how we should structure our individual lives to avoid becoming stagnant pools. And I have to say, it is an intense prescription.
It really is. The author explicitly advises against clinging to a single location or even a single relationship.
Wow.
Yeah, to maintain mental agility and intellectual growth, the essay argues we must frequently change where we live, where we work, and the people we interact with.
So what does this all mean for a normal person trying to build a life?
Wait.
Because I'll be honest, constantly changing jobs, packing up your apartment to move to a new city, and perpetually cycling through a social circle, that sounds completely exhausting.
It does sound exhausting.
Doesn't this relentless forced flow sacrifice the deep foundational trust that only comes from long-term stability? Like, how do we balance keeping our minds agile with the very real human need to put down roots and actually belong somewhere?
That's the core tension, isn't it? But if we connect this to the bigger picture the author is painting, we have to rethink our definition of stability entirely.
Okay, how so?
We're culturally conditioned to view stability as standing still, like building a fortress of stone that cannot be moved.
Right.
But this text asks us to view stability like riding a bicycle.
Oh, I like that. So the stability only exists because of the forward momentum.
Exactly. If you stop pedaling, you fall over.
Right.
For Schweffing, joy, freedom, and well-being are not found in putting down immovable roots. The author sees that as an attempt to dam the river of your own life.
Because when we stay in one place indefinitely, our brains just go on autopilot to conserve energy. We stop truly seeing our environment.
Exactly. By forcing movement, we force cognitive friction. We force ourselves to stay awake.
So clinging to a town or a job or a comfort zone isn't safety at all. It is the early stages of intellectual and emotional rot.
Yeah, the cognitive load of moving is the very thing that keeps the mind alive.
That completely flips the script on how society tells us to achieve success.
It really does. Which leads us to the ultimate grand conclusion of Schweffing's essay. The text culminates in a utopian vision that the author calls the world of great harmony.
Right. The world of great harmony. This is the final logical endpoint of scaling up this physical law, right?
Exactly.
Right.
We started with the currents of the ocean, moved to the velocity of the 100-yuan bill, examined the rotation of employees in a chain store, and now we've arrived at the structure of the entire globe.
According to the text, this world of great harmony is a civilization completely devoid of national borders.
Yeah.
It is a world defined by the absolutely free, uninhibited movement of all human beings across the planet. The author argues that this state of total global flow is the fundamental prerequisite for ultimate human joy, freedom, and happiness.
It is the final victory over the stagnant pool. By removing the dam, the borders, the rigid institutions, the hoarded wealth, the entire human race becomes a single, flowing, low-entropy system.
A completely fluid reality based entirely on the physical mechanics of a river.
It's quite a vision.
It is. So we want to turn this back to you listening right now. We want you to use this framework to audit your own week.
Yeah, take a hard look at your life.
Where are the stagnant pools in your daily routine? Have you been sitting in the exact same role at work, letting old annoyances fester into deep resentments?
Are your ideas and your capital locked away in a vault of potential energy, or are you forcing them out into the market to circulate?
Are you clinging to the illusion of a stone fortress, or are you pedaling the bicycle to maintain your balance?
The essay makes a rigorously argued case that movement equals life and stagnation equals decay. But exploring this framework does leave us with a profound contradiction to consider.
What's that?
Well, if absolutely everything from our money to our relationships to our national borders must constantly be in flux to maintain value, What happens to our sense of history and identity?
That's a good point.
Can true flow only exist if there are solid, unmoving riverbanks to guide the water? Without some form of unyielding boundary, does the river just become a destructive, directionless flood? Just something to think about as you navigate the currents of your own life this week.
A perfectly flowing river still relies on the friction of its banks. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the wordless heavenly book and the surprising physics of a well-lived life. Keep your momentum going, and we will catch you next time.